Hey everyone, welcome to this next episode of 10 for the Developers. I'm Darian Vorlick, Production Coordinator here in CIGL Los Angeles.
And I'm lead technical designer Kirk Tomei.
So first we wanted to thank the subscribers for being able to make content like this possible. Without you, we would not be able to put forward such informational interviews and content as such as this. So from us, thank you guys.
Thank you guys.
So let's get started with the first question. Kirk, you got one?
Okay, the first question comes from Farseeker. Since you are working on the Xi'An Scout, which from its initial concept had a set of movable thrusters, can you update us on the technology development to support this, as well as any effect it might have on other ships with rotating or otherwise articulating main thrusters? Specifically, any comments on the Cutlass, the Freelancer, and the Reliant would be deeply appreciated. Yes, we can certainly talk about that. Just to start on a few comments about the Xi'An Scout, which I'm currently implementing for the hangar ready in the hangar. The actual name of the vehicle is the Opoa Car2Al. It is the manufacturer Opoa's conversion of the Xi'An Scout for human use. It currently has a single seat and no ejection capabilities. I just wanted to put that out there. We decided that for a light fighter of this size, the current single seat arrangement worked best for it. In the future, we may have a variant or perhaps another Opoa manufactured ship that may have multiple seats, but the current iteration of the Car2Al is single-seater. The thruster questions on it. Yes, the Car2Al will have 4 articulated thrusters. The thrusters themselves will orient themselves to actually be able to completely turn 90 degrees, up to 90 degrees, for the outermost axes of each of the thrusters themselves, and will include the retro thrusters in the front. So they'll be dual-sided thrusters, which will greatly allow the Car2Al to have a lot of maneuverability, so that the main thrusters can actually contribute to horizontal and vertical thrust as well.
Basically vectored thrusting.
Right. The way we're going to do this is we're going to allow the main thrusters to contribute to sideways thrust without actually animating them as quickly as they need to provide that thrust. One issue that we had with the Cutlass, and we still currently have with the Cutlass, is that having the large thrusters provide thrust in the actual vector that they're facing makes the thrusters so that they're really flappy. And so from the rear, when the Cutlass is flying, should we provide any type of vertical thrust to provide stability for the ship, we found that they're just simply too flappy, and it just looks awful. So the way we will do this is to provide that thrust and actually throttle the speed at which they rotate, so that we'll have a ship that has this type of nice floaty motion without having 4 long wings that simply flap in the wind, which will make it look awful. So we're still developing that, and we will, of course, have that available for the engine and for future ships, so that will become available. In the near term, we're considering making the Cutlass thrusters rotate only for VTOL takeoff and landing. The same may be true for the Freelancer. That way, they still will have joint rotation without that weird flappy animation. And some other technology we will need to develop is the Car2Al is one of the first ships that will have a landing and a flying mode, which are vastly different. You'll notice that it is very folded up when it's landed and will expand out like a flower when it's in flight mode. The same will be true for the Reliant. So what we'll do is we'll create states for the ship, landed or in free flight. That way the thrusters know how they're going to behave, and will allow things like turning them off when it's in it's in landed mode, or for the Reliant, because of the vertical orientation of them, we will know how the thrusters are supposed to actually affect the ship because of those two states that the ship is in.
Now, how does something like, we have our flight engineer, John Pritchett, who works on the IFCS and SCM, how would his how does this change what he needs to do with as far as flight control systems?
So that's a great question. We would discuss with him how we would need to signal the ship so that it knows which orientation it's in. I think a simple variable in the ship will determine when it's not in landed mode or when it's in flight mode, and then John can then recalculate what the actual thrust from each of the thrusters needs to generate in order to maintain proper flight based on that orientation of the thrusters.
That was a mouthful.
It's a complicated ship.
Next question. This one comes from Andy Goodstar. Hello, Kirkandarian. Are alien races treated as one manufacturer each, or are there different brands of Xi'An, Banu, Vanduul ships, and what is the specific signature of the Xi'An Scout manufacturer? I figured we kind of tack this one on since we were just discussing the Scout. So right now, Xi'An, Banu, and Vanduul are kind of their own, I don't want to say brand, but I guess species brand in themselves.
Sure.
We may in the future look to expand those, but at this moment, we're kind of looking at just as single manufacturers, correct?
Correct. The Vanduul components were implemented as Vanduul components. The Xi'An components will not. They will actually be as we're doing a component refactor. The Xi'An components will be actual manufactured components. So we'll have human components that are on the ships, so that you can upgrade them, exchange them out, etc. In the future, I think we will work with the writers and then come up with the alien manufacturers and have their own, each with their own components and their capabilities, so that we can do things like have Xi'An-specific components or whatnot. For now, we are currently going with the human components.
One of the things, if you actually guys watched the 10 for the Developers with Sean Tracy and Steve Bender, one of the things they talked about was human to alien analog components. For example, if a Vanduul is how many X feet taller than a human, you don't want a human wearing a Vanduul t-shirt because it's going to be a lot bigger. So we also have to take that into consideration as far as when we create these alien manufacturers. We can't really just take an alien T-shirt and throw it on a human and say, hey, we're done. I mean, we have to take into consideration what the human sizes are, what their dimensions are, whether it's compatible with human ergonomics at all. So looking at kind of just, rather than just creating a bunch of alien manufacturers, we want to make sure that something that actually is realistic, fits into the story, and actually fits into the game mechanically as well.
Right, and that's a consideration for the Car2. All the control scheme are these two spherical control components that humans will put their hands on. It's just a prototype at the moment. We'll refine how that actually works, but the early example of that was on the what are the Vanduul ships? The Scythe
and the Glaive.
And the Glaive. They had their own custom UI that had an alien flavor to it.
Right.
Same thing would be true for the Xi'An type of ships.
And that's why Zane, our UI guy, he put static across the UI as it's trying to show that we're trying to translate alien technology into human use. So it's still a little buggy in games, with a little flavor to that.
Yeah,
it's kind of cool.
It's
but in
awesome.
the future, we may expand it. So you never know. Speaking of components, you had a component question there. I think it's kind of nice to tail into that.
Yeah. So we'll go to there's a three-part question here. These came from Daz, Halberd, and Tommy Train. Great name. In regards to the component system, can you discuss some of your recent accomplishments with this? Also, do you expect we will be able to get a component stat page similar to the ship stat page we have now? That's a great question. Have you considered adding a ship designer page to the website so we can tune our builds before committing? Will changing the components of the ship have a noticeable effect on its performance and capabilities? Are there plans to have multiple viable upgrade paths in order to prevent everyone gravitating towards a single build? are you considering a balancing mechanic for upgrading so that improvements in one system come at the expense of another? And finally, how are gameplay design concepts of modular components and component tuning materializing themselves in design of the components for the latest and future ships coming off the pipeline? That's a long sentence. Are they interacting as these components become real things with size, shape, mass, as well as output forces, effects, and corresponding draws on the components which provide energy, cooling, compute cycles, etc.? This is a big topic. We are currently tackling each of the components one system at a time. I'm sure you've noticed that we recently just refactored the coolers. That it did involve actually sizing of the components, because we do intend for these components to to have actual there'll be real components in the game on the ships that
Taking
you
up
can.
volume.
Yep, and they'll be sized appropriately for the capabilities, be placed on ships with ships that have interiors, such as the Constellation or the future Idris or any of the larger ships. We will have access to them from the interior, so that when we implement damaging gameplay, which we're still designing at the moment, you will be able to access them and have a crew member run down the hall, go down to the power plant that has been damaged, and then actually repair that by accessing the component from a panel, say, in the hall that contains that particular component. So there will be real physicalized items that are in the game.
So you're talking about very, very Scotty from Star Trek type of thing, where
Yep.
someone needs to go down and fix their shield generator or fix the warp core or something like that.
Exactly. So if the engineer does notice that, hey, we got the coolers damaged, now we don't have cooling on the right side of the ship, you can send the engineer down to physically fix that component, or perhaps even trade it out for a brand new component and get instant access back to the cooling capabilities that you just lost.
So just hope you don't have to run a full kilometer length ship.
Yes. So that may be a possibility. So what does that entail? Well, we're refactoring all of our components so that we actually keep in mind the capabilities, the positives and negatives of each of the functions of that particular component. I did mention coolers, so cooling capability, power draw, signature. These are things that are going to be integral to how the coolers will work. What we need to do then is get that system in, and then take a balance pass to figure out, okay, so we have a size 1, say, Drake, I don't know if they've actually created a cooler at the moment, but Drake cooler, well, where does that sit as far as its capabilities? Is it a C grade item? What does C grade mean? We define that, and then we can place those on ships that would be appropriate for that part. A size 2 or a medium size cooler would go on one of the larger ships. It has its own detriments and its own positives, which you can decide how you want to outfit your ship by either purchasing the component, or when we have future gameplay in which you can salvage components, perhaps you can actually pirate one off a larger ship and discover, hey, this is way better than mine. I'm going to go ahead and place it on the holotable and include that on one of my loadouts for one of my ships. Also in the future, we may allow the capability of particular like craftsmen to hone certain components so they can actually improve them. Maybe they get better at improving a certain manufacturer's coolers,
like tuning and
plants.
overclocking type stuff.
Yep, and so that would be great. It'd be a great career for someone to be a specialist in.
Or a ship mechanic.
Yeah, and then you can earn your credits or do whatever you want to do, and become that go-to person in the Star Citizen universe to get better at that particular skill. What else what were the questions? So the tuning. What does tuning and balancing mean? Well, it means different things for each of the components. What it ultimately does mean, though, is that we figure out what each of the components do, what their range of capabilities are for their particular stats, and then we make realistic ranges for those particular values. We are in the middle of, we've done a pass on coolers, we are in the middle of doing power plants, and we are in the middle of refactoring shields as a system entirely. So we will have shield emitters on the ship that are powered by shield generators. So when you upgrade the shield generators by purchasing a new one, you will increase the shield capabilities of your ship. Things like, number of phases will most likely be tied to the ships, but the regeneration rate of the ships, the absorption rate of the shields, rather, how quickly it can shunt power from the primary face that you set onto the ship. These will all be things that you can upgrade by purchasing new shield generator components.
So you're talking about like someone in middle of combat, you want to redirect further energy to the front or to the aft,
right?
Or it's from the port or starboard side,
right? And so if you have a lesser performing shield generator, for example, it may take longer for a completely a shield face with 0 health to recover and get back any shield capabilities. So you may consider purchasing or finding a better shield generator to upgrade that particular capability. That may mean more power draw, so you actually have to purchase a power plant that is capable of powering all the components that you decided to fit onto the ship. So that's what balance entails. Currently, all of our most of our components are outclassing their capabilities. So power plants generate more power than you'll ever need. Coolers can cool more heat than you can ever generate. What we need to do is, as we implement these components, we need to step back and take a look at what the actual values for the components that we've created. What are those ranges? Now, what are those extremes? How do we figure out how these components fit within those extreme ranges, and then figure out, okay, this is the sweet spot for that particular component, and this is where it sits. As a player, you decide by mixing and matching the components onto your ships how they actually work and whether they provide the desired functionality that you want to implement,
while still maintaining usability and functionality.
Yep.
I'm trying to remember correctly. I think Matt Sherman explained it to me. For example, if a ship had 2 shield emitters, it could be, if there's one in the front and one in the back, or one left and right. I mean, you pretty much have just 2 halves of a shell, correct?
Right. And so,
but if one has 4, you've got much more control because now you've got them in quadrants.
So those are faces. So you do have 4, and I want to create 6 because to me 4 doesn't quite make a lot of sense. Front back makes sense.
And you got top and bottom as well.
Right. So bubble makes sense. Front back makes sense. I think 6 is the next logical step.
Right.
But that is a function of smaller ships. Mm-hmm. Now, when we get to capital ships, what we'll ultimately want to do is you will want to have, say, 4 shield emitters. One that controls the front quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, and the rear quarter. Each of them controlling their own faces. That way, we'll have gameplay in which, if you destroy the shield emitter or the generators that are connected to the front 4 faces, you actually have a chance to now infiltrate the ship from the front, and give you an incentive to go after that sweet spot in the front that you've dedicated so much time to destroy with a squadron of small fighters.
Well, let's say you've got a long carrier like a Bengal or Pegasus or even Idris. I mean, you've got something that long, you can have even mid-bulk emitters. So if one of those gets taken out, you still have an opportunity to have something sneak in while one of those shields are still down before it pops back up.
Right, exactly. And
that creates some really cool missions.
And I think it'll allow players to figure out strategies not only to attack ships but defend themselves. Mm-hmm. If you find that you're frequently outclassed in the front, well, let's get some shield generators and upgrade them on the front side, because we know that that's our weakest
very
point of
Spartan
entry.
type of attack.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can lower one of them, trying to lure them into it, knowing that's where your main guns are.
Yeah, eventually we'll get to actually figuring out how the engineer can do things like shunt power or priority to those shields. And so, this is a big discussion on just one of these systems, and we're doing this for each of the components as we go down the line.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting stuff. This next question is kind of a much more production-related question from Perry Hope. He goes, do you guys specialize on game aspect, or do you need to know everything about that game? That's an interesting question. One of the goals of what production is we basically try to make sure that designers like Kirk have the resources they need to make the game possible. So while I was the production coordinator for the tech design engineering team, it's not my job to know how to do coding or how to do engineering or necessarily even how to do tech design. I just need to make sure that they have the resources they need, make sure the information is being correctly funneled to them. Now, ultimately, what can cause a bottleneck is something like lack of communication. Or what else would you consider?
That is the priority number one. Mm-hmm. Communication is the most important thing that a producer can provide any employee in development. We need to keep those channels open and ensure that everyone knows what they need to do and are expected to do. That way, we don't have issues where, hey, I didn't know that Jimmy here was supposed to be doing this. I've been waiting on him to finish this other task, and which prevents me from implementing the thing that I wanted to do. Right. So communication is absolutely number one.
And I mean, a good producer will be able to keep their team in the loop at all times. An excellent producer will be able to preemptively predict what obstacles are coming down the road, be able to foresee, what things down the road are going to bottleneck, such as knowing what the other teams are working on. For example, we have Mark Hong, who is our art and animation producer. So if I'm working on a particular feature as a producer, my goal is I want to be able to talk with Mark to find out what he's working on, see how what he's going to do is going to affect what Kirk's team is coming or what is doing down the road. So if we see that Kirk is working on a particular component for a ship, if I find out from Mark early on that ship is going to be delayed or the art's not coming along as quickly as possible, it's my responsibility to be able to provide that information to Kirk, say, hey, we've got a little more cushion time as far as that particular ship. So if you have something else that you need to work on, some low-hanging fruit that you want to complete in the meantime, that's where the producer comes in and lets these guys know that's what's available. As far as specialization, it's useful to be able to talk to those developers at an educated level. Like I said before, you don't need to know how to program, but at least know what those programmers are doing and what they're working towards. Same thing with tech design. We necessarily don't need to know everything about game balance. We just need to know what their objective is and how do I help them, or how do producers help them complete that objective.
Right, and from a developer standpoint, it is my responsibility to inform producers as far as the things that they do need to know about that particular task so that they can make educated choices about scheduling and task priority, etc. At the same time, when I do need to talk to, say, one of the artists or the animators directly, it should be part of my duties to inform the producer in charge of that particular individual that is happening. That way they can ensure that maybe a higher priority task should take precedence, or that they know to follow up on that task in the near future, and then we can all figure out, hey, where are you in the along that timeline? Are we getting close to being done? Because this person is waiting on that. And so juggling tasks and figuring out what priorities of things is the resource that we use from the production team.
So it's kind of a nitty gritty kind of behind the scenes look at of game development. It's not the most romantic or glamorous type of question, but it is one that's important. So that's why we wanted to address that. There are things that go on behind the scenes that help streamline a lot of these things, other than just making pretty ships and cool levels.
Okay, so this next question comes from Sloan Warrior. How did you decide on how the sizes of the components for the component systems work? We've heard that ammo bins might be able to hold fuel when they're not being used for ammo. Is this a uniquely interchangeable system, or might other components also grant storage space for one resource or another when removed? Great question. So
I'm picturing like hidden panels, things like that.
That
like
smuggling,
a fake fuel cap.
Yep, smuggling is a topic that has come up for piracy or just being able to stow equipment safely for you on your ship. That is a topic that we're in the midst of discussion for. Components were, there were the pass-on components for each of the components types, and they were mostly done they were spearheaded by Elwin, who took the metrics that we use for the ships and for any of the buildings in FPS.
We're talking about metrics, like volume, length.
Right, so these are the standard minimum doorway sizes that we have in the ship, the standard minimum walkway path that we need, things like seats, turret sizes, weapons, any of these components, we took a look at them and decided, okay, a size 1 small component should be roughly this size and no bigger than that size. So what we did is we took the maximum allowable size for the component and ensured that all those components that fit that size fit neatly in that box.
Right.
So everything's box shaped. That way we can ensure that when we build a ship that has a physicalized component, when we swap out a size 1, say radar, then we can actually implement another size 1 radar in the same space without having to have custom geo just for that enclosure. And that ensures the swappability of components and allows us to make components that are unique enough to make you want to get a different type of component to suit a different need.
So it's actually something that we've discussed in the past, and we're finally starting to see a lot of this fruition, or come to fruition, is the standardized modularity. You might have heard some of us talking for previous 10 for the producers, 10 for the designers, that we've been looking at trying to create standardization for these sizes for a long time.
Right.
And that was something that was spearheaded by Elwin. So by creating standard bounding boxes, you create a template for every single size 1 or every single size 2, because now we have a range of measurements that we can utilize to put those components.
Right, and that's important for us as designers because when we're implementing a ship in white box, we can take these bounds that we create for the ships and we know, okay, well, this is going to require a size 2 component of this type. We need to ensure that it is placed in the ship roughly around here. Well, we'll need access to it because the ship does have an interior. So we can communicate to the artist that there needs to be a corridor or some kind of wall in which there's a panel that we can access this. So when we go to actually repair it or swap it out or salvage it if you're a pirate, that there is the capability to physically access that object. What's also interesting about that is when we eventually have the ability to damage these components from the outside. So we have gameplay and you're shooting up a ship from the outside. You know you can target the shield generator because you can take the shields down. Well, you know where that is roughly in the ship. You can start shooting around it, and you will know that it does embody a physical location of the ship, and you know where to target that particular component. On the converse, when it is destroyed, you also know on the ship, the engineer can tell you, hey, go down to hallway A and repair the shield generator. That crew member will know exactly where to go, which panel to pop open, and which component to repair.
Or in your cargo hold, you could have a whole crate full of different shield generators. Your engineer runs down, take one out, run back to the cargo, grab the new one,
Yep.
and throw it in there. So not just fixing it, but actually replacing components as well.
Right. So that's part 1 of the question. Part 2 was, are we going to allow interchangeability of components? In general, no. So most components will be in a specific slot for that particular component. Some of the component types, though, such as ammo, fuel, I think there is one more. I don't remember off the top of my head, but there is a category of components in which you can choose to fit any one of those types that fit in that particular range of components into that slot. So if we do have, say, a smuggling hold that is placeable on our kind of pirate themed ships, that is a component type you can choose to fit onto that ship. If, however, you really want to, on the same ship, fit it for longer quantum travel or further distance, maybe you'll choose a quantum fuel or a regular fuel canister instead. If you really want to fit out a ship with a lot of weaponry, well, let's put an ammo box in there instead. So that is a category of component types that we are implementing in the near future. However, for the most part, components will fit into their actual design slot.
I just thought of it's like ship USB systems.
Yeah, not quite that modular,
but at the same time, let's say you have one labeled as a fuel tank, and in technicality, it's actually a cargo hold. If let's say a player is a police officer who's trying to investigate this pirate ship, and he sees a fuel tank there, but he knows pirates tend to use these as cargo holds. I remember hearing someone discussing about being able to scan them and be able to trick scanners as well.
That is something that we'll have to design and implement, but yeah,
Just
sure.
sometime way down the road.
Yeah, we can also design, say, a cargo hold that does disguise itself as a
Fuel tank or an ammo box.
and actually has that. When we implement that actual scanning gameplay, perhaps there's a way in which that mimics the component that it's trying to
Right.
pretend to be. That way, you can smuggle or use it as a smuggling canister, because we're only going to make a finite number of ships, and so there's no way that we can say that, hey, we can randomly generate these smuggling holds. So each ship, if you take a minute to study, you'll know that, hey, there's a capability of it
Yeah.
having the smuggling hold. So let's figure out gameplay in which you can make use of that item and still get away with that gameplay by giving us the capability to fool up the whoever's trying to scan that particular item.
So, I mean, if you use a car analog, I mean, no matter how many Ford Mustangs you look at, you're going to know where the engine is every single time.
Right.
This one's kind of more of a discussion topic. This one comes from Sultan. We just had a big step in Star Citizen. Do you feel more pressure now than before that the next big step will be more impressive than the last? Essentially asking, with every release, do we feel pressure to outdo ourselves every time? And I think it's a kind of a ubiquitous, unanimous yes. When we released 2.0, that was with much great fanfare that we finally released, multiplayer, multi-crew technology. But we already had our sights on 2.1, and now we've got our sights on 2.2. And every time we release one of these patches, yes, the pressure is there to deliver, but we're always confident that we can always deliver more and more. And that's kind of what we try to do every single time. If we try to release, inferior content every time, we want to make sure that we're wowing you guys with every new release. That's why we're constantly showing you guys new ships, new technologies. We have discussions like this to kind of keep you guys up to date on what we are working on. So is there pressure? Absolutely. But we're pretty confident we can outdo it each time.
Yeah, and just like any other company, the more and more we do this, the better and better we get.
Yes.
This includes things like planning for the future. May not have been so great at that in the past, but as we get to overcome more and more hurdles and get to each goal, we get better and better at planning for what we'll need, and ensuring that we can achieve these things without simply having it as a line item in an email. Hey, we know what we're going to do, but how do we get there? Figuring out the steps that we need to take and incrementally improving on each of these processes is something that we're getting better and better at every day.
And this is actually where a lot of production work comes in, being able to pre-plan what those objectives are. We may, let's look at 2.3 or 2.4 and beyond. We may have a rough idea of what we want to be in those patches, and ultimately Chris is going to dictate what we want in those patches, what content we want to deliver. So it's up to production to be able to pre-plan all these schedules out, and this is where a lot of our tools like Jira, Microsoft Project, what we're starting to do is standardize a lot of things. In fact, as Kirk mentioned, as we do this and fine-tune it, standardization of our practices is going to help us accomplish those goals and be able to make them a higher quality each time, because we're looking at what tasks have we done in the past, what have we completed before, and how can we apply those same practices in the future. So I guess just as long as we keep on trucking, it's going to get better.
Okay, so next question comes from Raven. What are your thoughts on massively increasing the hull and shields on all ships equally across the board? Currently, I feel ship battles are over quickly, and this gives little time to respond to system failures in larger ships. I would like to see this as battles would be longer and more immersive, allowing you to repair systems and hull breaches for more of the decisions matter effect. Right now, by the time you take on damage, the fight is over before you can finish the chair animation.
That's kind of the nature of the smaller ships, though, right?
Yes and no. I mean, this is a very fair criticism of some of the, especially the arena commander battles. What we need to do is, when we are refactoring each of these systems, Shields is being refactored as we speak. We then need to take a balance pass and figure out what we need to do to change basically the min and max ranges of each of the values in the system. So, for example, with the shields, we are going to introduce gameplay in which you can do things like give priority to a certain shield, or change the way it can repair faces faster, or do shield face hardening, or the way in which it can either faces can absorb damage or deflect damage away. So once we implement these systems and get that gameplay into the game, then we need to go and sit with each of the ships and start shooting at shooting at the ship, figuring out, okay, well, ships of this size with this particular shield can withstand this much damage for this amount of time, and put that all on a big chart, and then figure out where each of the ships lies, and if we need to tweak any changes. So to answer your question, we do need to do better balance passes for each of our systems. Making hulls and shields across the board larger may not be the best way to do that.
You want to have more tactical combat rather than just overall buffs.
Sure. And so what we can do is we can take a look at each of the systems individually: shields, hull, health, mass, damage per second by weapon type, etc., and figure out, okay, where in the realm of the things that we want to look at, like DPS for weapons, where does that particular weapon sit? Where should it sit? If it isn't sitting in the right place, we figure out, okay, we need to tweak these particular values and make sure that they do fit a role for that particular component type. So yes, we want to make gameplay more interesting. We will do that with balance. I think this will definitely come into play as we start making larger and larger ships, because as we do implement ships that or ship types that we haven't before, we need to figure out, okay, how do we do this without breaking what already exists? So if we make the Constellation, if we made it impossible to destroy with a couple of Hornets, wouldn't be very fun. So figuring out where, again, the ship lies, where the capabilities of each of its system types should lie, and ensuring that those values are correct is part of our jobs, and we need to be better at that.
At the same time, let's look at real-world analogies or comparisons. Like, if you have two people on motorcycles that crash into each other at high speed, chances are they're both going to get wrecked pretty quickly. If you have a car hit a motorcycle, chances are the car will be pretty, a little dented, but the motorcycle's going to be pretty totaled.
Yeah, that's true. We still need to, as game designers, we still need to figure out a way in which that's fun.
Yes, absolutely.
So
you don't want it to be over quickly, but you still want to add an element of adrenaline pumping with tactical strategies.
Right, and so that also comes into play when we're designing ships. We can't make a ship that is just OP, and in which playing any other ship types is just no fun.
Right.
So we figure out, okay, how is it better than other ships, yet consider, if you have a fleet of smaller ships, can it take it out? Let's figure out a way in which we can do that.
So ultimately establishing just a really good, strong meta for the combat.
Yep.
So this one comes from Minion Soldier, and this is kind of an interesting one. How do you coordinate efforts between gameplay feature implementation and relative ship completion? For instance, if mining was being brought into the client, would you automatically put the Orion into production, or would you shelve mining until the Orion or other small mining vessel was done? This is where a lot of the strategic planning and communication between production to design comes into play. And this is also where a lot of good direction from management, such as Chris or Ben, also comes into play. So when we release a feature or a ship thematically, for example, if we wanted to do a salvage feature, ideally we want to have content for players to be able to take advantage of that. So a salvage specific ship would be a good example of releasing when we release the salvage mechanic. Same thing if we want to release a repair mechanic, having the Endeavor, having that come out at the same time would also be a good sense. If we created a mining mechanic, using your example here, if we created the mining feature, but we don't give players a ship to do mining on, it's a feature that's basically sitting there waiting until we have that feature completed, or a ship that can take advantage of that feature. So ultimately, this is where planning and pre-production and communication comes into play.
Right, and so none of these things are coincidental. When we do decide to create a ship and then decide a release date for it, we need to ensure that the systems that are unique to that ship actually exist, are designed out, and are implemented from code and tech design, so that those systems are in play by the time the ship is actually created.
Good example is quantum travel. I mean, if we release quantum travel without any ships that can quantum travel,
right, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so there's a lot of design that goes into that. For quantum travel is a great example. We needed to decide what quantum travel was, how it realized itself in the game, what component, how the component interaction for quantum travel was. Standard things like the distance of quantum travel, time for quantum travel. Quantum fuel is a thing now, so we implement quantum fuel as part of quantum travel. That's a system that needed to be designed before we created the ship that, or a bunch of ships that were capable of doing quantum travel.
It's an excellent question, but yes, it is not coincidence that we release these like that.
Okay, this last question from my side comes from Azrael. With regards to increase in ship sizes, i.e. the Idris, are some of the smaller capital ships still going to be capable of landing planetside? If they can, when will they be able to actually walk in and around them? I've been jonesing to see what the Idris has become since its transformation.
I've been waiting for this question. This is a cool one.
That's a great question. We are discussing that now. However, for the most part, we are deciding which ships are planetside landing capable or not when we design the ships. One interesting topic that came up was for some of the snub-nosed or smaller fighters, we are deciding to either make them quantum travel capable or atmospheric landing capable as a trade-off between, for having such a small ship, you need to pick one that suits the needs that you are looking for. This is especially important when we have ships that are capable of carrying smaller ships. The Connie is an example of one, though the Merlin doesn't actually function on it yet. But when it does, you'll get the capabilities of what the Merlin is able to do when that comes online. For other ships that have snub-nosed fighters, for example, or a carrier ship, you can decide, well, you know what, I really want to park this carrier outside of a planet, and then go down to the planet's surface using all these smaller atmospheric landing capable ships. Or what I really want are a bunch of, say, like taxi style vehicles that allow me to shoot across the galaxy and then meet up with other ships very quickly. You'll need to make that decision. So as we design each ship, we are deciding whether or not they are quantum travel capable and atmospheric landing capable. So these are things that we're deciding, and it's on a ship-by-ship basis. When will we get to see this? Well, that's a great question. We're working on these. We're making these ships as fast as possible. However, all of these ships that are medium-sized or larger are definitely going to have interiors that you can walk around with, and walk around in. I discussed earlier things like being able to access the components from the inside. Right. That's going to be a big thing. And so, yes, there will be interiors that you can walk around in, and then interact with other crew members, interact with components, systems. There are standard things that we have, like beds and bathrooms, etc.
We want to give players a reason to walk around these large ships.
Right.
A reason why you want to walk down this hallway and open this door, other than just, besides having a reason of just having a large ship. We want to give you guys a reason to walk down that hall, open the door, access this panel, apart from just being able to do it for just that reason.
Right. And then we'll need to make decisions such as how do we make modular components for these ships. So at least on a ship level, when we create a ship like an Idris, it's impossible to fill every square inch of that thing with custom geo. So we need to figure out what a standard hallway is, what a standard room is like, what the engineering station is going to be like, if there's an engine housing room, if there's a cargo area that we can make modular and place on several parts of the ship. If there are if there's landing areas for that ship, how do we make choices so that we can make a ship that's functional and is within reason schedule-wise, because we want to create the best content as quickly as possible. And so these are things that we consider when we're designing and ultimately building the ship from nothingness to something that we can actually see in the game.
Let me give 2 examples. And I mean, for those who are anime fans, let's look at the Cowboy Bebop anime series. You've got the Bebop ship that carries, spikes, swordfish, and you've got also Faye and Jet's smaller ships, and they use the Bebop to travel through warp gates, carrying those ships. And even though that Bebop can land transatmospherically, it still has smaller ships that it can carry with it. But if you look at something like Battlestar Galactica, where they have giant fleets of ships, and some of them are orbital space stations that are jump capable, but something that's shaped like a ring or like an orbital station is not going to be able to land. So you want to have shuttles and lighter ships they're called lighters, that can go in between ship to ship or transatmospherically up and down, or even have orbital docking yards where you get out from there and then take a taxi or a shuttle back down to the surface. So it's ultimately going to be decided by what that gameplay's need is, what those ships' functionalities are going to be, and what that role that ship is going to fill. So ultimately, there's going to be an ultimate large size of what ships can land. Something like...
I don't think we've made that decision yet. We are... I think we're going to decide on those capabilities based on the role of the ship. What is it? What is that ship made for? What's the reason to own that ship? And then we'll make a decision about those particular characteristics at that point.
Right. I can figure something like a Bengal carrier trying to make a landing would cause major atmospheric problems. So this last question, again, it's a discussion piece. This comes from Aragorn BH. And this is, what is the most useful suggestion you have received from a Star Citizen backer, and did it change the way in which you value feedback? This is a very subjective question, and we filled you with a lot of technical details today, especially as far as a lot of components information. We get a lot of input from all around because of this is a crowdfunded game. We get a lot of input from players on where they'd like to see the game go, what ships we should create, and ultimately, while we are following Chris's vision, we still like to solicit feedback from the backers and from audience. The most interesting one that I got was a possible cultural faux pas I did back in one of the original tent for the producers, where I kind of made a joke, and what I thought was a pretty safe joke. It did end up offending a couple of backers from a particular geographic region.
Please do tell.
It was...
I didn't know about this.
Someone asked me, how did I meet Travis, or what's it like working with Travis? Mm-hmm. And I said I had met Travis in I think I said a Serbian prison camp. And he took a knife from me once, and I've been indebted to him ever since. It was said, just offhandedly. Mm-hmm. There's no intention. I could have said, a Japanese prison camp or an Antarctic prison camp. It didn't matter. The joke was regarding the prison camp itself, that he took a knife from me once, and so I've been indebted to him ever since. Mm-hmm. That was the joke. But because I used a certain country's reference that does have a history of political turmoil, mm-hmm. a lot of viewers from that region were really upset. And I know it sounds very superficial, but it actually did change the way I present information and the way I think about certain answers, and the way I actually approach certain individuals within the company, as far as being more, not necessarily being politically correct or culturally aware, but it did remind me that we have a very wide audience, and while trying to walk a neutral line is an impossible thing, ultimately there's a way information can be presented in a very humorous way, and while still being able to maintain an objective conclusion.
Sure. Staying professional is pretty important.
Right. Anything from you?
I can't think of anything specifically. What I will suggest, though, is that we do get a lot of feedback from the community, and it's terrific. Keep it coming. We do read everything, and we do consider everything. Some things are simply impossible to implement, or it's not feasible within the either the design or the scope of the systems or the world that we're the world we're creating. However, we do enjoy all the ideas. Any idea that comes from the backers in the community is welcome. So let us know your feedback, because without you voicing your opinion, we don't know what you guys are thinking. So continue that, and we welcome it all.
Yeah, we could be working on a great idea from our perspective, looks absolutely amazing and kick ass, but we put it in game and realize, a lot of players aren't using it because they might find it boring, or it may not fit the original vision that we had for it. So this is where a lot of feedback from you guys comes in. So I want to amend my answer a little bit. While that one instance I gave is something that changed my perspective, we do look at everybody, as Kirk said, we do look at everybody's suggestions, and those suggestions are what help mold the game.
We got these questions from you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it's been a very, very technically oriented 10 for the developers, with Kirk giving us a lot of information as far as the component system and how a lot of that kind of fits into the game system. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. We try to keep it as entertaining as possible, but again, we wanted to thank the subscribers for being able to make this kind of content possible. Without you guys, none of this would be able. So from us, it's a very humble thank you for making this capable. So once again, I'm production coordinator Darian Vorlik.
And I'm lead technical designer Kirk Tomei.
So thank you again. Thanks for watching this 10 for the developers. See you
Thanks.
guys next time.
Hey guys, thanks for watching 10 for the Chairman. If you guys would like to see more episodes, go here. If you guys would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel and always keep up to date with all our video content, go here. And if you guys would like to watch episodes of Around the Verse, go here please. And I will see you in the verse.